Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming out to our panel. We're hoping that it's going to be a lot of fun. Our topic today is on mobile and startups. So we've got three great folks to chat with today. We're going to cover a whole host of topics, and we'll also open up to the audience for questions as well. As a way of introduction, my name is Nick Bagg. I work at AOL within our membership team, and I also work in Fishbowl Labs, which is our small incubator, 6 floors directly below us here. And so when we were starting to talk about topics for this panel, mobile obviously very important, and for AOL in particular, as we're starting to think about our acquisition by Verizon, and then our recent acquisitions of 2 companies, Canvas Labs and Millennial Media. It's, from a personal perspective, particularly exciting for me as well. And so without further ado, I'd like to just introduce our panelists, and we can get started. Starting on our far end here, we have Lou Mintzer, who is a Senior Vice President of Product Development at Homesnap. So I'm sure many of you, or most of you, are familiar with Homesnap. Homesnap is an online platform that provides real estate services, both for consumers as well as realtors. Next, we have Patrick Stoddart, who is a founder and CTO of Phone to Action. Phone to Action is a digital grassroots platform that makes it easy for organizations to organize and attract and engage supporters. And then last but not least, we have Emily Rasowsky, who's founder and CEO of Women in Tech. And I'm hopeful that most of you had the opportunity to listen to her talk before this. Heard wonderful reviews. Just to kick us off, Emily, based on your previous, your previous talk about women in tech, it would be great to hear first sort of what you're thinking of when you're thinking about the most pressing issues with our industry today.
Yeah, I mean, I think when it goes back to technology as a whole, I know earlier in the discussion we were talking about kind of the cultural implications of what this means for the industry. And I think if we're looking at it as a whole, what's happening in our world also directly impacts what's happening in the tech space. So from a gender and diversity perspective, which is a lot of the places where I sit, I think we're seeing a huge need for a shift in the way that we look at hiring and diversity in technology, to not just say we need to hire more women, we need to hire more diverse practices, but we also need to really change the conversation around what it means to be a woman in technology. And I think this directly relates to kind of how we're looking at mobile technology in this industry, because what we're seeing more and more, and especially in developing countries, developing areas, women are turning towards technology that's really accessible to them, mobile being one of the key factors in that equation. So a lot of the stories that we see, a lot of the things that we're seeing coming out of some of these different areas of the world are focused on the impact of mobile and how to reach people where they are.
And Patrick, would love to get your thoughts on it as well.
Yeah, so like Emily, I mean, I think that the diversity in hiring practices is really important. It's something that we spend a lot of time focusing on, and that we spend a lot of time honestly struggling with. But I think probably for us as a startup, a growing startup in software, I think that our toughest thing is just finding talented people that can work in small, agile teams and can adapt to that environment, can work and iterate quickly on things. But just finding talented people, I think, is really, really difficult for us in general. And I think that's one of the things. We're starting a couple of initiatives within our company, which I'll maybe talk about a little bit later, to try and solve that, or to try and kind of mitigate against that. But for us, that's one of the biggest things.
Excellent, thank you. And Lou?
Sure. On the topic of diversity, first, let me introduce myself a little bit more. I manage the product design and development team at Homesnap. And so Homesnap's a real estate app. Our claim to fame is you just snap a photo of any home to find out all about it. But we've retooled a lot over the past few years, and now we've really positioned our product as a productivity tool for real estate agents and home buyers to add value to their life when they're trying to find a new home, a new place to live, or trying to help someone else find a new home. And so I think on the topic of diversity, the best I can do is kind of give my report from the front lines, right? Which is I'm trying to build a product that's for a user who is predominantly female and predominantly middle-aged. And so I view having a diverse team building that product is a very powerful thing to help us have a better product. And, in the past 18 months, I've screened over 1,000 candidates trying to add to my product team, engineers on iOS, Android, web, backend, designers. And, less than 5% of the applicants have been female at all. I found it's a lot easier to build a ethnically diverse team than it has been to build a gender diverse team. But yeah, when I do get a resume from a female, that moves to the top of the list to me, and I get very excited about it because this is an opportunity to really, make the team more diverse. And my last 2 hires have been female, and that's been something that's been pretty cool to add new insight. And then I guess my other report for the front lines is I have a daughter, a 2-year-old daughter, who I would love to be involved in technology at some point. And so whatever, I can do or we can do as an industry to make those on-ramps easier to access, I'm all for that.
Very excellent to hear. Thank you. And Emily, as we're starting to talk about future leaders and emerging leaders in the tech industry, when I was sort of looking at your website and running through, one of the things that really struck me was the language you used around expanding technology beyond traditional technology type skills. How are you thinking about that, and how has that sort of tailored your approach with the specific profiles you featured?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that the campaign really focuses on is sharing stories from women from all different backgrounds. So our goal is to really expand that definition, as you said, to be encompassing of all backgrounds and experiences, both hard and soft skills. And why do we do that? Why is that so important? Is because we really feel that if we can do that, if we can begin to shed light on folks that are really a part of this community as a whole, we can actually begin to encourage more women to be involved in this space, to feel like it is a space for them and that they can have some ownership of it. So I think it's definitely a growing area for us, and it's something that I think drives the core of what we do to really expand beyond just a certain set of skills that says, okay, a women in tech is someone who has a specific background, but they have a specific set of desires or understanding of how to leverage technology to make some change in the world and their communities.
Out of curiosity, with respect to one of your recent profiles, can you share about someone you found who is particularly impactful or really struck you as being very different from that perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. So for those of you guys who were in the session earlier, I'm going to repeat this one just because, to be totally frank, I have all the talking points for it, so I'm just going to share it because I think it's awesome. So this woman, she created an SMS text messaging system in Nigeria during the Ebola crisis. And so it wasn't necessarily that she was a programmer by trade. She didn't have an engineering background. She was a healthcare worker and decided that this was something that could really make an impact in her communities. And it was one of the key tools or reports later that said it actually helped eliminate the cases of Ebola during the outbreak. So not necessarily a traditional background. They're using tech to improve their communities, but, and I'll just kind of preface that by saying there are so many really cool examples. So don't just listen to that one. Look at some of the other ones that are on the site because they just blow me away every time.
Great to hear. And as you start thinking about that, you mentioned the community, and Patrick, I'd be interested to hear your take on this. Specifically as you think about as you're building your company with a support system and sort of figuring out your mentors, your advisors who can help you, and hopefully some of them eventually turn to employees. From the start, how do you really start thinking through that process and who you're really evangelizing your product and company to early on?
Yeah, so that's one of the things that we also put a lot of thought into, because it kind of goes around this sort of holistic view of recruitment, which sounds very transactional, but sort of evangelizing, getting the word out, especially when you're a small startup. We're growing very quickly, but we're 10 employees right now. So our brand is known in our circles, but not in a broader context. And so kind of making our mark and getting ourselves out there is very important. So we prioritize just internally. I think a lot of it has to do with prioritization and being strategic about these things. So we internally prioritize not just marketing, but visibility efforts as a company, and we encourage everybody in the company, from founders to engineers who may not normally want to go speak somewhere, or to customer service people, or anybody in the company, to get out and kind of make a name for themselves and be a part of the community, not just speaking, but going to meetups and always representing the company well, and things like that. And I think we've done a fairly good job of that. I think as the team grows, we'll start to see a greater and greater impact of that. But we have to instill, put a lot of effort into instilling in everybody that they're representing the company, and that it is their responsibility to do that in a positive way, but then also, like, it doesn't just benefit the company, it benefits themselves, because in doing so, they're finding mentors, they're finding these people that can help enrich their skills, can help them grow. That's something that I personally went through even before starting Phone to Action. I remember on my first company, when starting that, I was a sole founder, and it can be very lonely and very difficult. And I remember a year or so into it, just finding mentors and finding a tech community, a local tech community, made such a difference. So we try to impart some of that attitude on our employees, and I think it really goes a long way.
Lou, as being part of a very very fast-growing company, I'm sure you've experienced much of the same things. Would you be able to give your take on it as well?
Sure. Which aspect do you want me to dig into?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the recruitment, but the aspect I'm really curious about is specifically the community and sort of leveraging that as a way to build both your company's brand as well as the folks who would eventually join your company.
Sure. So Homesnap, we are in the real estate industry, and there's a community there, but we're a software development shop. There's just no question about that. I mean, 3/4 of the company is engineers, designers, programmers, that kind of thing. And so I think we play in two different communities, right? We have to get real estate agents and people in the real estate industry excited about the app. And so we do a lot of things that are related to that. September is Realtor Safety Month, which you may or may not be aware of. And so we've been doing a big push to, do content marketing around realtor safety and going out into the field and doing presentations at brokerages and teams and for groups of agents and going to real estate conferences, just trying to get our user base, jazzed about using Homesnap and helping them understand it. And yet, it's also important for us to play in the tech community because that's where our builders come from. And so actually my Android developer here is here today. I don't see him in the room. He's probably in the code lab. But he was, there he is, over there in the corner. He's coming up on his 1-year anniversary because it was at DC Tech Day, which was a conference where we met and we did an on-the-spot interview, and it turned out to be a really good fit. And it wasn't, long until we hired him, and he's part of the company. And now he's like one of the key guys building our stuff. And that would only happen through, in real life kind of interaction. And I might as well use this as an opportunity to plug. I have an open rec for any Android developers. So if anybody wants to do an on-the-spot interview, catch me after this panel.
I think you made a good point about kind of playing on both sides of it. That's something that we have to do also. Working, obviously, we're using technology to solve the problem for us of connecting citizens with their lawmakers, but because most of all of our clients really are in the advocacy space, political advocacy, we spend a lot of time there as well in making a name in that space. So it's kind of like this dual thing, and I think our engineering team spends a lot of time in tech circles, but then we encourage them to get involved in the advocacy side too. So they're out there interacting with customers and prospective customers, so they kind of get that holistic view of the industry, not just the tech side of it. So they see how these tools are being applied, so that they can think a little bit more critically and more creatively when they're building things. I think that's really important too.
Absolutely. And Emily, one of the things that really struck me is most of the folks that you have on your site, I mean, you've had 80 different profiles, 8 different countries, and how have you actually gone out and sourced many of these? I mean, are these from your local circles? Have you, from the international perspective, have you gone about getting those folks interested and reaching out to them?
That's a great question. That's a great question, and it's actually one that I get asked quite often. And I think it speaks to the fact that some of the things you guys were talking about, tech is one of those things that really permeates most industries, kind of cuts across industries. And so for us, it wasn't necessarily let's target one industry or one subset. We really had to take more of a wide-scale approach to it, and there is no secret in how we've actually grown. It's mostly Twitter. Like, that sounds crazy. It's kind of simple, but Twitter. and online and digital, like just searching and trying to find women who are really awesome, or say there's a really cool article that we see and hey, there's 5 people who we really want to feature, and we'll just reach out to them. It's surprising what people will tell you and how friendly they are if you actually just reach out. So it's just a mix of a little bit of hard work and social media stalking, I guess.
Very nice. And Patrick, I saw an article, I guess towards the middle of last year, that was written in the Washington Post. The title of it was "Have a Smartphone? This Startup Will Turn You into a Lobbyist." I mean, those sorts of
Minus the
PR.
payday. We're not paying people
no,
lobbyist salaries.
certainly not. I mean, for those sorts of opportunities that are more, not certainly something that you controlled, and was a nice boost. I mean, how do you think about that as you think of your other marketing opportunities and really structuring your overall go-to-market strategy and your user acquisition?
In terms of like earned media versus paid?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so we have not, again, we're growing very quickly. We're still fairly small. We have not put a whole lot of money until recently into paid media. We are fortunate to have a really strong group of clients behind us that love the tools and love our support and love what we're doing, and so we get a ton of referrals, and that's helped from the business side. I think earned media for us has been, at least to this point, has been much more valuable, especially when you get hits in like the Washington Post, or for us, Politico is really helpful just for our client group. And those have brought us, significant, measurable amounts of business after the fact, but then also a lot of visibility. I mean, we still have people, just kind of like what you just did, we still have people we're recruiting or that are reaching out to us, asking, sending resumes to us, that will bring up a lot of our earned media and say, oh, I saw your article in the Post at Times or whatever, and that helps give some context to what we're doing, and kind of, I think like with all startups, kind of lends an air of legitimacy to it. So it's definitely been very helpful, and something that we've focused on, building those relationships and trying to get some of that out there.
Great. And then Lou, from your perspective, I mean, you have around 5 million users of your consumer products. I mean, from a marketing strategy perspective, how do you approach leveraging those folks as a way of building your community? And then, as a sort of a secondary question on the B2B side, when you're interacting with realtors, how do you go about evangelizing your platform to them and trying to onboard them?
Sure, yeah, I'm going to pull on the thread that Patrick mentioned with earned media versus paid media. I mean, when you're a startup, even if you're a venture-backed startup, it's very, very difficult to commit to a significant paid media strategy unless you completely understand how the money machine works. You need to be able to put in $1 and get back $1.25 reliably before you can dump enough money into paid media to move the needle. But the good news is there is a lot of runway on the earned media side of things. I mean, press is great. Word of mouth is the single most powerful way to earn media. Social media, you can do things like email marketing. Still, everybody checks their email every morning. Don't underestimate the value of email marketing. It's incredibly powerful, and we've driven a lot of awareness and engagement through email. SMS marketing, if you follow the proper procedures, can be a really good channel. And then the key is the product itself has to include some viral hooks that not only have a must-have kind of aha experience right away, but also provide people incentive to use, repetitively use, and then share with their peer group, your app. You want to provide a special experience and then make that special experience that someone can then share with the people that they trust. And that's how you tap into word of mouth, and that's how I think you get the most out of your earned media. And then only when you're kind of have exhausted that and you've gone through a growth period where you've built brand awareness and you've built up a user base, can you start thinking about things like paid media and advertising and direct response and brand advertising and that sort of thing.
Excellent. So when we spoke earlier, we started discussing a little bit about barriers to entry and whether or not sort of the mobile space particularly lends itself to being easier to enter than perhaps more established industries or more established sort of sub-industries. at Homesnap, I mean, obviously you have, you're attacking many platforms simultaneously. You're attacking the B2B space, you're attacking the B2C space. Do you find that you've sort of, I would say, built up some competitive advantage in doing that? It becomes more challenging for your competitors to replicate what you're doing or out-exceed you?
Sure, yeah, I can tell you a little bit about how that works in the real estate industry in particular. So, you know, I'm sure many people in this room have searched for a rental or a new place to live, and it's kind of interesting because you only tend to do that every couple of years, and the industry has just like changed so much in the couple of years. It's practically like new every time you do that. But for a long time, since the late '90s, the web has kind of like ruled the roost, right? And real estate is this like federated thing where each local metropolitan area has its own MLS database. That is pretty much the record of which homes or properties are for sale or for rent. And so DC and Baltimore have one, LA has one, Charlottesville has one, Virginia Beach has its own, and there's over 800 of them across the country. And so these associations essentially collect dues from their members who are real estate agents, and then they use those dues to provide services. First that was just a database that contained all the information, but then that turned into websites that put that information on display to the public. And so that was things like a JavaScript-based map search, property listing pages that were tuned to be picked up by Google, and it was pretty inexpensive to build websites and property pages that did that. So many MLSs across the country took it as incumbent upon themselves to build up a real estate website, and many agents did the same, and many brokerages did the same, and many teams did the same. And if you go in Google now and just Google your own address, you'll see on the SERP, you'll see Zillow listing, a Trulia listing, a Homesnap listing, Realtor.com, the local Coldwell Banker branch, MRISHomes.com. And so websites were like a dime a dozen, and that worked great because real estate search has a very long tail because lots of people are doing address keyword searches. And then, after the iPhone came out and the world kind of changed, right, and the app stores grew up, the game like totally changed. So now instead of having like a really slick website, you need to have a really slick mobile app. And when people do a search on the App Store, they just search for something like real estate app or homes for sale. And so you only really get the head of the keyword curve. There is no tail anymore. And so if you're not one of those like first 1 to 5 apps that show up when somebody searches for real estate, you're in trouble. It's also a lot more expensive to build a first-class, best-in-class real estate app than it was to build a website. And now not only do you have to build a native app for iPhone, but you need one for Android, and you need one for iPad, and now you need one for wearables, and tvOS was just announced on last Thursday. And so, now the game has changed. And so if you have a really good mobile app, and this is what Homesnap is doing, we're building one really, really good app and then letting all the different MLSs plug into our app. And so they now have realized, like, okay, it's just not possible for us to compete in this new domain. We're not going to be able to build a native iPhone, iPad, and Android app. But we need some way to compete with the Zillows and Trulia and Realtor.coms of the world. And so we've built Homesnap into that alternative. And so they can plug in their data into our system. We follow all the fair display rules that they set out. We're really industry friendly. We exist to help realtors and to help brokerages succeed. And so that has been kind of the moat that we've built. Build the first-rate application that other people can tap into, and that becomes a better alternative for them than to go strike out on their own and try to reinvent the wheel.
I think in your case, just from what I'm hearing, it sounds like the open platform thing is also a big component, probably, of the sort of moat that you've built, right? Because some of the other, at least from what I've seen with the less knowledge of this industry, some of what I've seen as far as the native apps in real estate try to build all the content themselves, or try to maybe pull from MLS, but try to crowdsource a lot of their content, and they don't end up with, like, it's harder to hit that critical mass, I think, that way. And so it's interesting to hear you talk about letting MLS and other brokers and whatnot in. as a way to also kind of feed your machine, kind of help with your distribution.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely true. At the end of the day, the wizard behind the curtain is like the database, because the important part about delivering value through Homesnap is the information that you can present to somebody when they take a picture or search for an address. And so the data that you have in the database is the important part. The snap or the actual UI, that's only really a supporting character. And so the real estate industry does have some open standards. RETS is what it's called. It's an open data spec. But yeah, one of the really interesting things is I mentioned that there's 800 MLSs and they all kind of grew up on their own. You can go to one in like Boise, Idaho, where it's just like one dude still running a Microsoft Access database, and he called the columns, bed_1, bed_2, baths, or something like that. And then you go to another, go to a city in Boston, for instance, that has they've outsourced their database to like a major technology vendor, and they're running on a totally different standard. They have totally different column names. They use different enumerations to define all the values and the lookups. And so one of the things that we do is just like untangle that mess and like normalize it. And so we take all these like databases that like basically contain the same data, but it's stored using different names and different values and different systems. And we, do the plumbing to put that into one, true catalog of the real estate data, and that's our database. And there's no like a lot of times I'll tell people like, yeah, you snap a picture of any house to find out about it. And they're like, oh, that's great. What do you use? Like the Zillow API? And I'm like, there is no API to just like look up every house. Like that just doesn't exist. It would be great if it does, doesn't exist. And so building that is like actually the real moat.
Excellent. And Patrick, when you sort of think about the industry that you're changing, that has sort of, I think some of the same characteristics as the realty industry, how do you approach that from technology that folks are already using, or are they at all, and you're really starting to enable that behavior for the first time?
Yeah, so I think the answer to that question kind of is woven into kind of the story of where we started as a company. And so I think where for a company like Homesnap, it makes a lot of sense to, in some ways, differentiate on having a really robust native app. I think that the important thing for any growing company to do is to really take a step back and think about who the target audience for this technology is, or for this solution really is, and where technology plays a role, and specifically where, if we're looking at mobile, where native versus mobile web might play a role. And so for us, we actually haven't gone the native route yet, and much of the reason for that was early on, we started, just kind of some background, I guess, on how we started the company. One of our co-founders worked as a national director of outreach for a large advocacy group, and she would coordinate events with thousands of people all around the country, getting them to come out and hear their CEO, their president, speak about this issue, about education reform. And she's a really rousing speaker, so she'd get thousands of people at this event, and she would give really like rousing speech about education reform. And at the end of it, they would say, "Now go like us on Facebook or follow us on Twitter, or go home and email your lawmakers." That's my favorite, because who the hell knows how to do that? And if let's say on the off chance that you did decide to do that, you would go home and sit in front of your computer, your desktop, you can't do this on mobile, have to know who your lawmakers are, put in your 9-digit zip code, which means you got to make a trip over to the US Postal Service site to find out what that is, go back, you've got to fill out 14 fields, and then you've got to repeat that process 2 other times at the federal level for all of your lawmakers. And then at the end of the day, this organization has no idea how many people actually did that. I would guess it's next to 0, but we don't know. So we thought, obviously there's got to be a better way to do this. And our thinking was, how do we capture people in the moment that they're fired up at a live event? You have this really great speaker, you're spending all this money and all this time and effort to get these people out to this event and get them to identify with your organization. You're trying to get your brand in front of them, and you're trying to get them excited about the cause. But ultimately, you're judged, like back to your funders, based on how well you can move the needle legislatively. And so we thought about how can we take something from like a Facebook like to something that's much more impactful. And so we started to think about, obviously mobile is the answer there, but we started to think about, okay, native in the context of a live event, is that native or is that mobile web? And we actually decided it's mobile web triggered by SMS. So it's much easier to tell somebody in a live event context to text info to 52886 or to text a keyword to a short code, and then they get a link back in the text message response to a mobile web page that lets them take action right there in like five fields. We got the 14 fields down to 5. And it's much easier to do that than to tell people, okay, go to the App Store or the Marketplace, and go in and remember your password and go download this app or whatever. Now, if there's a compelling reason in other cases, so like in the case of something like Homesnap, or where you can really take advantage of a lot of the phone's other features, like location and all those other things, and camera, it's a little bit different, right? And so you've got to look at the business and look at the market that you're serving. Part of it for us also was when we started with, we launched with our first couple of clients were advocacy groups that were specifically targeting underprivileged youth or underprivileged communities in cities all across the country for education reform. And many of these people, maybe have smartphones, maybe they didn't, at least at the time that we started it, but they do have SMS. And so starting with that, for us, lower barrier to entry from the consumer side was really important. Now, as we've grown, we've seen more of a need, and especially as technology has advanced and the penetration of that technology has gotten wider, we've seen more need for multimedia, bringing in some other things that are more kind of innovative and creative tools for connecting with lawmakers, and that's where native starts to come in and play a role again. And that's where, once we have a steady footing, which we now do, we can start to introduce other tools out to our existing user base. And that's been our strategy from the beginning. But I think both play a role. You just have to think about it a little more critically from a business perspective to decide which route to take.
Patrick, one thing you said that I think was interesting is you're kind of touching on this idea that technology can really help leverage some of the energy that's been created out there. So a lot of times what we see is that the old way of trying to think about the technologies or the products or even the work that you're doing is, okay, I'm going to sit in a room in a silo and figure out what is the best idea that I have, and I'm going to push that out to like a bunch of people. And if I push it out enough, if I interrupt people enough with what I'm doing and why it matters, maybe they'll actually use my app, maybe they'll actually use my tool. But what you're talking about is actually quite fascinating. It's something that I think we've been seeing with the women in tech work that we're doing as well, is that there's already these pockets of experiences where people are fired up, they're excited about something, they're talking about something really interested, whether that's, education reform after a really exciting event, or whether it's, women in technology after, Sheryl Sandberg releases her Lean In book, whatever. So there's these opportunities to really capitalize on the energy of people that already exists, that's already out there. And so it's fascinating to see how mobile in particular is actually kind of leading this space and being a tool that you can use on a drop of a dime, right, to actually leverage the energy of people right where they are, right in the moment that they're interested in something that you're doing. And so it's this like real-time society that we're living in where I just think it's fascinating to see the growth of how mobile technology has not only grown, from a personal level, but actually also from a business level and just a strategic level, that this can actually solve real problems. So it's fascinating.
Excellent. I'd love to open it up to the audience for questions. Anyone has anything about these topics, or if there's anything else you'd like to address as well? Please.
So I have two questions. First, how do you calculate the customer acquisition cost for the first 1,000 customers for any application, any product? Second, and how do you deal with, second would be primarily for, I guess, how do you deal with the rising customer acquisition costs?
Sure. Well, I mean, the question was, how do you calculate CAC, cost of acquiring a customer? And the second was, how do you deal with rising CAC? And so, I mean, how do you, cost of acquiring customers, just if you acquire 1,000 customers, you divide that by how much money you spent to get them to come to you, right? And so if you're going after 1,000 people, I would say start with your friends and family and a LinkedIn group and a conference and an email listserv, and try to, put yourself in the position where you can be looked upon as an expert so that people will come to you. There's a lot of services out there to help you get your kind of first 1,000 customers, but really the best is to be recognized as something that people want to try. If you do that, then it doesn't cost anything because people will come to you, right? And so having some kind of like must-have experience or aha moment or something like that can be a needle mover. And even if that thing, is, like the snap a photo of a home, like that's kind of a parlor trick, right? Like most people do not do that when they're using Homesnap. Most people are using the map and they're analyzing schools and they're changing their search criteria. But we would have never gotten off the ground if we didn't have that kind of like special thing that helped us like get on the Today Show and be in the Wall Street Journal and have a successful launch at South by Southwest and things along those lines. And on the subject of rising cost of acquiring customer, there's a Andrew Chen blog post from a couple years ago, but I hold this as gospel, which is the law of shitty click-through rates. It's maybe the most insightful thing about advertising or earned media that I've seen, which is basically like when a new advertising unit is new, it has awesome click-through rates. Like even like web banners, right? Everybody hates web banners, and we've trained ourselves to like totally ignore them when we're looking at a browser screen. But like in the beginning, like the beginning's like Yahoo 1996, like they worked. People clicked on them at pretty good rates, and they drove business. Now they're horrible. Facebook advertising, especially Facebook app install ads, which came out like 3 years ago, those were amazing in the beginning. You could get an install for like $0.25. Now it can be like $12 to get somebody to install your ad. The same thing is happening with native advertising, which I know that's kind of like a big catch-all phrase. Right now Instagram is rolling out their self-service advertising platform. Like now's the time to be in there figuring out how to create custom audiences, how to maximize those ad units, how to get the best targeting. Basically, you want to be in when the platform is new, and then once everybody starts going to the platform, you want to be finding the next platform because it's starting to get saturated, and that's when the click-throughs get shitty, and that's where costs go up.
I actually went to a Gary Vaynerchuk talk, and he said pretty much the same exact thing. And one thing that we've actually used is not necessarily customer acquisition, but it's what we call conversion. We use a funnel approach. So we actually assign values to how much we're going to spend to attract, different amounts of people at different levels of this funnel, and you're narrowing and narrowing and narrowing to the bottom. So maybe your goal is to get 1,000 customers. Well, what do I have to have at the top of my funnel? How many people do I have to reach with some of the earned media, or if you're investing in paid media or social or whatever? What do I have to do to actually get that person to be aware of me? What do I have to do to get that person to be engaged by what I'm doing? And then eventually you just kind of funnel it in. And then there's costs associated with each of those. And from our perspective, as we've been growing the campaign, that's one of those strategies that we use to really understand what do we have to do to get people to join, to be a part of it.
For us, like I said earlier, we're not doing a whole lot of paid media right now, but we do have very much that same sort of funnel strategy. And it also may be a little bit different for us because we're, not sure in context of your question, but we're B2B primarily, at least that's where our revenue comes from. And so the funnel approach works very well for us. We know, at the bottom of the funnel, we need X number of deals worth X number of dollars, X number of deals at each customer segment, each revenue tier to come out of this. And with enough volume, so like for us, we're generally really good at closing, so like our close rates are really good. Our challenge is keeping the pipeline full all the time. And so we know, we have a very good sense, and our sales team monitors this very closely, of what the close rates are from different points in the funnel. So we've developed sort of different tiers along the way, or milestones that they've got to hit. And what we do then is, we have different people at different stages of the funnel getting people through. So we have, people that are doing, handling inbound phone calls and qualifying leads and determining if they go to this rep or that rep, or if they're not, really a good fit and things like that. And then we also are in consistent communication across the team with the people that are sitting at the top at every stage of the funnel, really, but especially at the top, hearing what product-wise, like what features are resonating, which ones get their attention. So we have some features that like we know internally are just table stakes, right? So kind of like the camera thing, right? That is just kind of like a flashy thing that people may or may not use it, but we know that it gets people in the door. And it seems sort of silly or like a waste of time or counterintuitive maybe to think of it that way, but you've really got to when you're trying to build that up. And so we look at our features in a couple of buckets like that to know, and we optimize them for different things, to know kind of where to take the product. So it all kind of informs back, but it's really important to have solid metrics if you take that sort of funnel approach, which I think is a little more clear with B2B, to have solid metrics at every stage and know how to optimize those. Yeah, it's a little bit different, yeah. There's still a funnel there, but it's just very different, yeah.
Absolutely. This has been great, and we really appreciate your coming out. And I want to thank each of our panelists for participating today. It was a pleasure for me to be a part of this, and thank you very much.